Do your seascapes feel stuck? Maybe the water looks dull or things just don't blend right. Painting loose, vibrant, and realistic sea scenes isn't about talent. It's about practice and the right techniques. And today I'll show you the ones I trust to bring all kinds of seascapes to life. These are the techniques I rely on again and again because they just work. And as a bonus, you'll also learn my go-to palette for seascapes, just a few colors that always mix beautifully. Hi, I'm Françoise. Welcome back to my channel, your resource for watercolor painting that's loose, realistic, and full of life. I'm going to walk you through the 3 seascapes that I painted just for this video. A deep blue sea scene, a sandy shore with turquoise water, and a colorful sunset seascape. Let's start with one of the most important and often overlooked tools in your painting toolbox. I'm talking about composition. So many watercolor paintings fall flat because the composition wasn't clear from the start. The rule of thirds is an easy and powerful way to fix that. I divide my sheet into 3 equal parts, both vertically and horizontally. And where the lines intersect is where you want to place anything important like the horizon or something like a sun, rocks, a boat. In the deep blue sea painting, I used the upper third line for the horizon to give more space to the sea. In the sandy shore scene, I flipped it, lower third for the horizon, because I wanted to showcase more of the shallow turquoise water. Same choice for the sunset seascape, but this time, the focus is on the sky and sun. And notice I made sure to place the sun on one of the focal points for maximum impact. So that's the first thing you can do to get started, and next there's color and the magic of a limited palette. That way, you'll get natural harmony every time, plus mixing is simpler and faster. For daylight seascapes, I like to rely on 4 essential colors. Those are really my personal picks: ultramarine blue, phthalo green light, quinacridone deep gold, and indigo. And you'll get to see how sometimes I also add a touch of white gouache, but we won't always need it. Ultramarine is going to be perfect for sky and sea. Phthalo green light mixed with ultramarine gives you a stunning turquoise. It's ideal for shallow waters. Quinacridone gold is my go-to for warm sand, and indigo is my dark tone. It's useful for shadows and richer blues. And the lightest lights, that's either going to be the white of the paper or a bit of gouache. In a sunset seascape, I switch it up. I use a warm yellow. I also like carmine red for the pinkish tones, and sepia for the darkest contrast. And that limited trio alone gives me intense oranges, rich shadows, and everything in between. You'll get to see these color choices in action next. And if you want to go deeper into seascapes, from splashy waves to underwater scenes, check out my popular seascape course, or if you prefer bite-sized tutorials, I'll be sharing the sunset seascape on Patreon this week. And there are many other paintings to choose from as well over there. So I'll link all of that in the description below. Let's move to technique number 1, the gradient wash. And this is going to be the easiest way to give depth to a scene. In the deep blue sea painting, I used a simple gradient wash to build the sea. I made the base darker at the bottom and lighter towards the horizon with a simple back and forth movement of the brush and letting the paint dilute onto the wet paper. That creates a sense of distance and light. And in the sandy shore scene, I did another gradient, but this time I used turquoise for the sea and quinacridone gold for the sand. And here's a tip. If you can, use 2 brushes, one for each color. That's what I did to blend the transition smoothly without constantly stopping to rinse a single brush, since turquoise and quinacridone together will lead to a muddy color, which is great in some cases, but we don't want it all over the painting. In the sunset seascape, I wasn't aiming for a clean gradient. That one was more about layering and movement, so I just added my pink and yellow colors wherever I wanted, and then I used a reference as inspiration with more yellows on top and around the sun, and more pinks elsewhere. Layering is one of my go-to techniques because it's essential for realism. It's going to allow you to deepen the colors, add subtle corrections, and also build up the detail in the painting. I often paint in a single layer, sometimes two, because I work fast and I use slow drying supplies. But if your paper dries quickly, which would be the case for the vast majority starting out, layering in stages is actually better. It's going to give you more control, cleaner results, and you won't feel stressed, or at least not near as much as if you're trying to get everything done in one go. So for example, in the deep blue sea painting, I worked quickly in wet and white. Since the ripples were meant to stay soft in that one layer was enough for me to build it up and get to the desired level of contrast and realism. And remember that if your paper dries too fast, you can break this down into 2 or 3 layers, no problem. Just make sure to stop and color layer finished when your sheet dries and that the edges start looking harsh. Overlapping is similar, but it's more about letting the paints interact directly on paper, and I use it mostly to build gradients between one color and another. So in the sandy shore scene, overlapping was crucial for depth, but also because the sand needed to show beneath the water. So I overlapped my turquoise and crinoline deep gold washes. It mimics how we actually see sand through shallow water, and it makes the painting way more believable. And actually, if the colors turn a bit muddy, it's not a big deal at all. We need a little bit of that naturalness in the painting as well. In the sunset seascape, I started layering the main colors, yellow and pink, and then I overlapped them so they blend into glowing oranges. Notice that I made sure that some areas look more yellow, some more pink, and others more of a mix of those two colors. It's the whole point of having different colors in one painting. So variety is important, and that really goes for color. We want to leverage that limited palette by mixing them. And at this stage of my painting journey, I managed to do it in one layer, but I would break this into several as a beginner. And if you go back to older videos of mine, you'll notice that I often use 2 layers, sometimes even 3, maybe even sometimes 4, depending on what I was painting. So I want to make sure that it's clear and you don't feel like you need to do everything in just one single layer. We'll just want to remember to make sure a sheet is completely dry before we layer on top again. Charging means adding more pigment while the paper is still wet, and it's a game changer for keeping things loose and lively. In the blue sea painting, I started light and I charged in deeper blues to form the ripples. I increased the paint load as I moved, and I let everything melt naturally. And that also helped me shape those ripples with no harsh lines. And you'll notice that as I was doing this, I started including my dark tone indigo. In the sandy shore painting, I charged in golden tones to add sandy textures, both underwater and above. A smart way to get the art to look realistic, but still very loose and free. Notice that the paint shows a lot more because we want to add pigments to the original mix. We want it to be thicker so it actually shows. And remember also at that point, the sheet is drying, so we need to increase the amount of pigment in our mixes so the level of humidity in the paint actually matches with the one on the sheet. In the sunset piece, I used charging to give life to the mountains and strengthen the horizon without making this addition look super tight and controlled. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference, and because it stays loose, it conveys the idea that those mountains are farther back, and the rocks I'll be painting later will pop all the more thanks to that. How you move your brush is going to bring your painting to life, and there are many ways to do that. The strokes can be straight, curvy, can be back and forth, maybe just tapping the brush on paper, and also the type of paintbrush you use can make a difference. In the blue sea scene, I exaggerated my curves to show wave movement, and curved strokes here really equal movement, as you can see. It's really that simple, And there I started with a flat paintbrush for the bigger waves, and then when I had the main shapes, I refined them with a much smaller and precise one. For the sandy shore, the water was still, so I kept my strokes soft and horizontal. So on wet, it turned out my strokes were invisible and that the background looked smooth and consistent, which was the point here. But on the sand, I wanted more detail, so I added more motion to help outline where I'd placed the foam and also build subtle texture. In the sunset scene, I used downward strokes to suggest reflections. And you'll notice that how fast or slow you move the brush and how much pressure you apply can change the look completely. So you can try experimenting with this. Glazing is like turning up the volume on color because it's going to be great to add richness and vibrancy to a painting. And I actually talked about it in detail 2 videos ago when I was painting a desert scene. In the sandy shore piece, I glazed a thin layer of green over the water to make it look more tropical, less blue. I also glazed extra quinacridone gold over the sand to boost the warmth. It's super quick and it works. And in the sunset seascape, I was not planning to glaze at all, but then the sky felt dull after the base layer. It wasn't that vibrant. So I just used glazing to fix it. I just added a transparent layer of pink and yellow, and it brought everything to life a bit more, very quick. And a tip here for you is to use glazing also to smooth out a few awkward transitions, maybe some strokes showing. With a bit of back and forth of the wet brush on your painting, this is really going to help smooth everything out. Highlights are what make water scenes as well as watercolors in general sparkle. And there are 3 main ways I use it, with lifting, gouache, and masking. In the blue sea painting, I just lifted pigments to bring out sunlit spots and gentle highlights. It helped me emphasize the ripples, and it was very easy to do. Just press a damp brush to the still wet surface, and you can see the result is soft and natural, and it's instant. It can really transform your painting if you practice it, and this type of seascape would be the perfect exercise for it because it doesn't take very long. In the sandy shore piece, I did the same, but I also added gouache to create the foam. I really love to paint foam in that way. So what I usually do is what I did here too is use both thick and diluted gouache for more realism, since in places the foam is going to be very pronounced in terms of color, and in others it's just going to be a thin layer of water over sand that you can barely see on the reference photo. And what's great is that gouache is great at getting us both effects and make it look convincing. You can get it to look very light or very crisp. In the sunset seascape, I used masking fluid to preserve the sun from the start. It being so small made masking the best option to preserve the glow while painting the sky freely. Otherwise, if you paint something like this, you'll keep trying to keep the paint off of it, and it's not fun. Now, a downside of masking is that it's not going to look that great, I find, especially if you leave it as such. It doesn't look natural. The edges are really sharp. That's why later I lifted pigment around the masked area, and I even softened the edges to avoid a cartoonish perfect circle look. Then I added just a little bit of gouache along the horizon for a soft gradient from very bright whites to paper whites to a very soft yellow. And as another example here, I approached this boat painting from my recent Skillshare class in the exact same way actually. This technique works really well for small things. So if you're on Skillshare, you can check that out over there too. Softening edges is how to make additions feel like they're part of the painting without anyone being able to tell that you've added anything. I didn't use this as much in the blue sea painting. Everything was wet and wet, so edges were already soft. There wasn't anything special to do for this type of seascape in terms of detail. But in the sandy shore scene, I softened the foam edges using a damp brush. It really helped the foam feel integrated, not like it's pasted on. And I don't know about you, but I find that it looks amazing and very realistic on seascapes. So let me know in the comments what your favorite technique is so far. The glazing, that might be mine. In the sunset piece, I softened the base of the rocks so they melt into the sea, since in real life they don't just sit on top of the water. I also used the technique to add a bunch of gentle ripples that look more defined than the ones in the deep blue sea, but still very natural thanks to that technique. To make things feel even more natural and not flat and boring, texture is the next thing. And it's effective when done on wet, like I showed you earlier on the sand, but also dry paper. That's why I used a dry brush with gouache to keep adding subtle, almost transparent layers of water between the foam and turquoise parts. You see it's there thanks to that technique, but it's almost invisible. Then a classic are splatters for added effects on the sand, and I varied the size and the darkness of the splatters. Sometimes you can see I also tap them with my finger so that they settle in nicely, and the shape looks different than the original splatter. In the sunset seascape, I skipped texture completely. I thought it was already busy enough with the rocks, the reflections, and a glowing sky, and all the ripples. So I didn't feel like there was any room for anything else because there are no rules and it's up to you to use these techniques as you please whenever you feel like creating this or that effect. But balance is important, so make sure and take a step back to check on that. So you see one process, a few intentional techniques, and just a handful of colors. And we painted 3 very different seascapes. And now I hope you got some ideas for this summer. So if this was helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. And if you'd like to go deeper, you'll find the sunset painting on my Patreon and everything you need in my full seascape course with a series of paintings. All links are just below in the description. So thank you so much for watching and see you next time.